City of Stevens Point Personnel Committee meeting, recorded August 9, 2021.
It is 6:16, and I will call the Personnel Committee to order. Manager Yakush, if you would take the roll, please.
Shore.
Here.
Zarazua.
Here.
Leek.
Here.
Dalton.
Here.
Jennings.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. We have a quorum. The second agenda item is requests for known 2022 out-of-state travel. Manager Yakush, if you would tell us not only about the substance, but also the process.
Sure. So I had included in the packet a copy of the administrative policy that references the known out-of-state travel. The month of August is set for those department heads having known out-of-state travel in the upcoming budget year, which is 2022. Have them bring them before the Personnel Committee so that they're known ahead of time prior to the budget process. So each of the department heads, Director Kramer, Director Karnowski, Director Badoon, and Director Lemke submitted their detailed requests that were also included in the packet. And I think all of them are here either in person or virtually if you have questions regarding the requests.
So thank you very much for that. So these are the known.
Right.
What happens to unknown?
So if something were to occur, and there was, I can only remember, maybe once in 23 years where we had something that came up mid-year. And I think it actually was when we were in the process of procuring some buses that were in California. And so someone from Fleet had to go out there and inspect the buses. Very rare. And then if that were to occur, it would come before the Personnel Committee and City Council for approval.
Thank you. So that says that these are annual, predictable, foreseeable.
Correct.
Thanks. And the committee's action on them is just to receive and
right, to receive
acknowledge.
And place them on file. Correct.
Okay. I would entertain a motion to do that.
I'll move to receive and place on file the out-of-state travel request for 2022.
Thank you, Alder Dalton. Do we have a second? I'll give it to Alder Zarazua. Any discussion or questions on the committee? Any discussion or questions from anyone else? Seeing and hearing none, all in favor of receiving these requests and accounting for them in the budget process, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any noes or abstentions? The resolution passes. Item number 3 is a grievance from Central Transportation relating to opportunities to fill in who would fill in for someone absent. And Attorney Beveridge is apparently ready to brief us on this. Thanks.
So in terms of procedure for this, we discussed it just internally earlier today, and I think since this grievance is being brought by an employee and by the union, I think it would be appropriate to have them present first. They can make their case, and then we can respond to it. But obviously, it's up to the discretion of the committee as to how you'd like to proceed in terms of order of operations.
I would take that suggestion. We have a union representative here. Please, thanks. Yes.
Thanks, Patrick Draper. I'm the union president. I'm also the subject of the grievance. Back on the date in question, back on 12 May. The way our contract is set up, and I think you guys have a copy I think management gave you a copy of the section that's in question. Basically, the contract is set up that the most senior operator that's available to work the entire shift is the first person to be called for any extra work. On the date in question, one of the morning day shift drivers had called in sick at approximately 5:30 in the morning. I would have been the first one on the list. However, I did not receive a call until almost 8 o'clock because they called another driver at 5:42, I think he said, and offered him the work, and he accepted. He was not available to take the entire shift, which in the past practice, because he overlapped approximately 15 minutes between his regular shift in the afternoon and the morning shift. So by the practice that everybody's agreed on, the union and management, he wouldn't have been available to take the entire shift. He would have only been able to take it if nobody accepted the work, and then they split the shift. The contract's laid out specifically. It says, like I said, the most senior part-time operator who could take the entire shift, which would have been me, should have been called. They contacted me a little after, about 8 o'clock or so, left a voicemail on my house phone. I wasn't available at that time, didn't receive the message until a little after 9. I was already in the middle of projects around the house and did not come in to work the shift. On the notes that management gave you, it says that the message stated, Charlene called off, give me a ring for that. The message actually states, hey Pat, Charlene called off, just giving you a ring for that. There was no ask for a return call. There was no offer of actual work out there. So I didn't know at 2.5 hours into the shift what I was supposed to do with that. At 5:30 in the morning, if you get a message like that, obviously you know the shift starts at 6:30. There's going to be work available for you. Management has declined to accept that. They've also declined to pay any time prior to the phone call. So that's where we're at now.
Thank you very much for that. And do any committee members have questions, first off? And I assume if we have questions, you'll still be here to follow up, right? Thank you very much. We might have questions for you, but I see Lisa trying to get my attention.
Yeah, I just had a question, Pat. Is that 920 phone number, is that actually Mark? Is that
I don't
the
know if
union
that's
rep?
Mark or not. He's out of Milwaukee, so I don't know if the
Oh,
920
okay.
is his
That
or
would,
not.
no, okay.
And
Thank
he
you.
never got back to me today, so I don't know if he was actually in Milwaukee.
Let's try this. There's a phone number starting with 920, ending with 9720. Can you identify yourself, please?
Yeah, I just got off the mute. This is Mark.
Oh,
There you go. Problem solved. That's what we do.
Attorney Beveridge?
I guess first, Mark, did you want to make any comments right now?
No, I had nothing to add.
Okay. So I'll just do a very brief sort of intro to some of the facts here, which obviously Mr. Draper referenced as well. And then I'll turn it over to the staff members from Central Transportation who actually, were party to the conversations and the events here. So first of all, there's absolutely no dispute here that the call-in procedure as it's laid out in the contract was not followed. There was an error, and then there was a recognition that error had occurred, and then there was an attempt to correct the error, namely that Mr. Draper was called and a message was left for him asking if he did want to come in. Well, I guess specifically, you heard the explanation. It was Charlene called in, give me a ring about that, which when you get a call from your supervisor referencing another employee who had been scheduled to work at that time, saying that person had called off and give me a ring, I think it's pretty clear what the intent of is to convey there. Mr. Draper, as he just explained, did not call back. He did not accept the shift and did not come in. So what you've got here, I think, fundamentally is a contract provision that says, here's how you do things, but you don't have any language at all in the contract that says, here's what should happen if there's an error made with regards to in this case, a 15-minute overlap that people didn't realize until the shift had been going for a little bit. So when you have a contract provision that is silent as to the question you're asking, which is what should be done if one of these errors occurs, then the best thing to do is to look at past practice, similar situations. And as you'll hear from the staff members at Central Transportation, we do have a couple examples, just particularly from this year, of similar situations, which I think are illustrating of the way that this has played out and what I would consider to be the past practice as relates to these types of questions. So first of all, on the 9th of June of this year, we had a driver who was scheduled for 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. At 5:57 a.m., the rural supervisor called for a replacement driver, and that person accepted the shift. At 7:31 a.m., so it's about 31 minutes into the shift, the AM supervisor noticed that there was an error, that the wrong person had been called. They called the correct driver, according to the contract, and that person declined to come in to take the shift. And the person who declined the shift was not paid. They didn't come in and do the work. So the person who had been called and was already there in error continued with the shift. And then on February 3rd of this year, there was a driver who called in sick for the 5:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. shift. At 5:33 a.m., so just after the shift was supposed to start, the rural supervisor contacted a replacement driver who accepted the shift. At 7:30 a.m., 2 hours into the shift, the AM supervisor noticed the mistake. It was a similar mistake to what happened in this case. Called the correct driver, and that driver did, in fact, accept the shift. Came in and started at 8:06 a.m., and the remedy there was that driver who arrived at that point a little over 2.5 hours into the shift was paid for the entire shift. The contract gave that person a right to be called first to accept the whole shift, and even though the person came in and only covered a portion of it, was paid for the whole thing. And of course, the person who had come in earlier was paid as well for the time that they had worked. So with that, I would turn it over to the staff members at Central Transportation who can go through the particular facts on this exact situation, as well as to just sort of testify to the underlying facts with regards to those past practices I just referenced.
Thank you. Director Lemke.
Thank you. As far as the details related to the timeline, I think we've been over it. I can certainly rehash those a little bit, but I'd like to highlight a couple things separate from that. And Attorney Beveridge got into a little bit, but one of the things that we've worked on over the years is trying to make this as palatable as it can be, given that you get the calls in the morning for somebody that can't come in for one reason or another, usually sick or something. And how do you get people to respond and fill those shifts? One of the things that I think was pretty clear, but I wanted to highlight, is the fact that the person who comes in that we might have called in on accident has the ability to work the entire shift too. So if you came in expecting to work the whole shift, we're not going to kick you off the shift, send you home after an hour and a half. You have the ability to work the shift cleaning or doing something like that. So in a lot of cases, we'll end up paying two people for that shift, recognizing an error on our part, right? The flip side of that is that also, if the error goes unnoticed for that entire shift, and say the next day we realize, oh geez, we messed up, it was supposed to go to someone else. We didn't correct our error, we didn't try to correct our error, we certainly didn't do it in a time that would have given anybody an opportunity to work that shift. We also have paid those. So this scenario lies outside of both of those, where the wrong person was called. The person was senior to the grievant here, but those shifts overlap by just a little, making it the wrong call. We corrected that a little while later. It's just that the call wasn't received or returned for reasons that are perfectly reasonable, I suppose. But no work was performed, so he didn't come into work. So obviously, the opportunity was there. It just didn't happen. Now, on the timeline, I think we've been over it a couple times now. One thing to note is that right at 7:30, when the AM supervisor came in, realized the error and corrected it as soon as he could after that. Everything else we go through up into step one, grievance. So I think that our role now is, do you have any questions for us operationally, past practice, anything like that? I've got Tom and Talon here with me also.
I want to make sure
Go ahead, and then then your colleagues after, go ahead.
I want to make sure I understand the past practice correctly. There was a situation in the past where the error was noticed the next day.
Mhm.
And did I hear correctly that you did pay a shift for that error?
Yeah, one that we had not recognized and therefore couldn't correct
Okay.
during the shift itself.
Okay, and the difference here is that there was a correction made during the shift?
During the shift when it could have been, at least a portion of the shift could have been worked, right?
Okay, but.
That's
okay.
accurate, right? Yeah.
Okay. But there was no answer to the phone call?
Yeah.
Okay.
Alder Zarzua?
So the, Mr. Draper is saying that he didn't know that the call he was receiving was for work. Are there any other instances where a supervisor would call staff and say a staff person has been called off?
Not that I'm aware. I think in our step 2 grievance, we addressed that a little bit. I don't know that I got any real answer to what else could it have been, but in my view of the issue, no, there wouldn't be another reason, but he might have a different explanation.
Alder Dalton?
How is the list of who's available given or made available to the supervisor? It seems, I guess it's concerning to me that this seems to be an ongoing practice of, oops, this is the wrong person, and I think that is
Yeah,
also
like I
something that
said here,
should
the
be
issue,
remedied.
yeah, the issue as it pertains to seniority wasn't there. That was the right call.
Yeah.
We've had some shuffling around in the department and some movement around, and there's been a lot of name changes and stuff like that. But it's a list. It's a seniority list. The difference there is that it was not noticed that the the fill-in work, if you will, overlapped the person that was being called at first, his normal shift that day by 15 minutes. That was our miss. And there's 1,000 combinations of that, you know. Had it been a 6-hour overlap, the driver that we called in would have been like, well, I'm going to be working.
Mhm.
But given that it was just barely at the end of the shift.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
The phrase "called off," what does that mean?
That is probably just I suppose a transit vernacular for called in sick or called in unable to work.
Is it possible that it means anything else in the transit field?
Not that I'm aware.
Okay, so if I say Mike called off, someone in transit's gonna know what that means, or at least question, maybe say, what the heck does that mean, right?
Well, and calls about that topic at all are surely in our experience about needing replacement drivers, yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've just been talking about whether there are any just procedure changes needed, recognizing, of course, that things happen, and that's not always the answer. So it sounds like there's nothing in particular that's clear needs to be done to make sure that the right calls go to the right people. That's one question. And the other, picking up on what Attorney Beveridge was talking about earlier, is whether that next level of detail and anticipating scenarios could be in the contract. So I guess I just want to kind of...
Mr. Chairman, I would
Yeah.
caution you
Yeah.
against talking about what future policies may look like. We should stay focused on the grievance at hand.
Okay,
Yeah,
so,
so-
yeah, let's get guidance about, what's permissible on this question of what the case at hand versus general practices and any implications for that.
Sure, and I think without getting into, making this a de facto bargaining session, I think if what the union is suggesting here is that we should read into the contract a remedy for this type of situation that says if there is any error, no matter what steps are taken to correct it, the remedy should be that the driver, independent of whether they come in and work or not, is paid for the full shift. I would characterize that as a fairly extreme remedy. I mean, there could be a very, very minor error, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, And then the effort is made to call that person, they don't answer the call, and then they say, okay, you have to pay me for the entire shift. If that's what the bargaining unit would like the remedy for this type of error to be, then they would need to bargain that remedy into the contract. I think that just the basic rules that we need to operate under are that when the contract is silent on something, you do look to past practice. And they're unable to point to a past practice with similar circumstances to this example where the driver was paid. As Joel went through, there were the other examples where the driver was paid for the whole shift, but that's when nobody realized that there was the error. There was never a call to ask if they wanted to come in. And the one last little thing I wanted to mention as I was talking to Tom and Talon, these types of calls to be asked if you'd be willing to cover a shift wouldn't necessarily just be very early in the morning either. Obviously, a lot of the shifts do start early in the morning, but there are shifts that start at 1:30 in the afternoon. There are shifts that start at 3 p.m. There are shifts that can start even later than that. So it's certainly possible that a driver could receive a call at all kinds of different times of the day to come in and cover a shift.
Thank you. Please, Alder Dalton, yes.
I'm just looking for clarification on the message because I think it sounds like it was Charlene called off, give me a ring. The description that we have, give me a ring for that. And I believe Mr. Draper said, give me a ring about that. And I think that that is substantially, if the question is whether or not work was offered, I think the language of the message is important.
Well, we certainly the best evidence rule would indicate that that was the correct thing to do.
Hold it up to the microphone, please.
Hold off, just giving you a ring for that. Thanks, 5 a.m. Hey, Pat, Charlene called off, just giving you a ring for that. Thanks, bye.
Give you a ring for that?
Is, if you would, if you don't mind staying, Mr. Draper. So, from my understanding, mostly we've been talking about the timeline, right?
Right.
And just kind of catching the wrong time and how being a bit off then, had the kind of, I don't know, domino effect. But are just trying to get clear on what is or isn't in dispute. Was the message itself not clear in terms of what it was about, or?
Well, like the attorney just said, management is under the impression that they can give us a call at any time during the day. I agree with that. When work is available, that is when when we should be receiving the calls in a timely manner. Not 2 hours, 2.5 hours later when work was available at that time. So that's what's in contention, is the fact that, yes, they can call at any time for any shift that's open. You know, we do have shifts that start at 10, we have shifts that start at 2, start at 2:15. So that's fine. However, when that work is available at that time, because the driver has to call in at a certain amount of time prior to the work being performed, they have ample time to call the correct people, not 2.5 hours later. How long am I supposed to sit around waiting for a phone call when that work started at 6:30 and I don't go into my shift until 2:15? Am I just supposed to sit there and wait at my house for 6 hours until I have to get ready to come to work? Or am I allowed to go out and do things? That's what happened in this case, this situation. I was not available to work because at 7 o'clock, I started doing renovations on my house and everything was a mess. So when I got the call or the message at a little after 9, I'm still not available because now I've got to clean up. I've got to clean up myself. I live approximately 35 minutes away, so I have to drive in. So we're talking it's an hour and a half, 2 hours prior to my shift to start anyway. So, what's the point of me doing all that and rushing to get in here when they should have called me at 5:45?
Great. So mostly I think we've got it, but any last thing that you want to say? Because
they brought up the past practice. The only past practice that they're quoting that would have qualified prior to this event was the one in February. He was available. He was at home. He was available to take the work. He wasn't in the middle of doing stuff. He wasn't out doing things. So he decided to come in. He does that all the time. I wasn't available. The June incident, that driver was unavailable, so he declined the work because he couldn't come in because he was already in the middle of doing stuff. So, I mean, this is kind of a first time when they've, I would say the second time, because the first one was in February. This is the second time that they've tried to correct the error halfway through the day or into the shift. All the years prior, all the incidents prior, they have never figured it out until it was brought to their attention, either later in that day or next day. So yes, they did pay that driver that was supposed to come in. This is kind of a incident that sets precedent. You know, what are we going to allow to happen? Are we going to allow them to make the mistake, correct it halfway through the day and say, oh, nope, we're done. We tried. 4 hours into shift, we tried to cover it. So it's like, at what point do we stop that and say, you have to call when work is available? I mean, that's the bigger issue. It's not necessarily this issue at hand. It's we're setting it up. When do we stop? I mean,
All right.
so.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion? Thank you. Tori, did you have?
Thank you. I guess this question is for the attorney. It sounds to me, my interpretation is not receiving a call back is equivalent to a decline. Is that correct?
Well, I think that there's actually not a need to read the tea leaves there. During the Step 2 grievance, as was indicated in the documents that were provided to the committee, Mr. Draper indicated that he did in fact review the voicemail at 9 a.m. and decided not to take the shift. He didn't call to affirmatively say, no, I am declining the shift. However, in this case, management presuming that it meant, that his silence meant he wanted to decline it, was in fact the correct conclusion.
Thank you, Attorney Beveridge and Alder Jennings.
Now,
yeah, go ahead, Alder Lee.
In this situation, and this might not be a question for you per se, but in this situation, is the expectation that the first driver who was called in error would not complete the shift, and the senior operator would then take over the shift and send the person who got up at 5:30 a.m. back home?
No, not quite. And actually, Director Lemke addressed that briefly while he was up here.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, that's no problem. I can go over it again. So what would happen is that the person who was called in error would not complete the actual driving shift, but would be offered the opportunity to complete the hours of the shift that they'd been called in for, doing other tasks at the department facility.
I see.
With, you know, their same standard rate of pay and everything.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I think we've got it. The question is, what is the appropriate consequence with general not agreement on every specific detail, but general agreement on the facts of the case. The question is, what's the appropriate remedy in light both of the mistake made, the attempted follow-through, the silence of the contract in terms of consequences, and whether compensating for the hours that weren't worked but also weren't provide the opportunity at the very, very beginning of the day. Just laying that out and closing the loop on one thing that Alder Dalton pursued, which was that any confusion about the message and what it meant did not seem to be a factor. That there seemed to be agreement on what the message meant. So with all of that, it is time for a motion on whether how to respond to the grievance. Manager, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that if you, whoever makes the motion, if it is to deny the grievance, obviously it would be to deny the grievance. If it is to approve the grievance, it would be to uphold the grievance.
Is there any possibility of splitting the baby and, say, acknowledging the grievance up to 9 AM?
I would defer to City Attorney Beveridge on that, but really, it's not.
No? Okay.
The grievance is outlined in the paperwork.
Okay.
If you believe the grievance to be true, you would uphold it. If you believe that the city made a reasonable effort and past practice to correct the situation, you would deny the grievance.
Alder Leek, if we did something like that, we would then be setting a new past practice. That would be the threshold.
And effectively negotiating.
Yeah, that's right,
Exactly.
that's right.
So someone will make a motion either way, or I will? Okay, fine. I will make a motion to deny the grievance,
Zarazua, I would second.
seconded by Alder Zarazua. Now that the motion is on the floor, before we vote, the last opportunity for discussion. First, the committee, and I'm looking at them, and I'm making sure to look at Alder Jennings. Yes, and now, people other than the committee, Alder Slawinski, go ahead.
I guess I just want to chime in as a previous transportation supervisor that, I've had many situations where, you'd be scrambling last minute to try to find a replacement for a driver that called off. So I completely get it when you don't get a call back, that it's kind of like, okay, move on to the next person because we got to get this filled. So I guess I agree with the motion in this situation, but I want to just echo all the Dalton's concerns that it seems like this seems to be an error that happens frequently, I guess. And I would hope that moving forward, we wouldn't even be here if that error didn't happen. So I'm assuming that Joe and his group are, coming up with a remedy so this error doesn't happen. So just my thoughts. Thanks.
Great point, thank you. I think that indicates that we might look at things differently the next time. That's a very fair point. Anyone else not on the committee? Do we need a roll call specifically?
Sure, I'll take a roll.
Well, you can do a roll or voice vote would be okay too.
Shore,
Aye.
Zarazua,
Aye.
Leek,
Aye.
Dalton,
No.
Jennings,
Aye.
4-1.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here and for laying the case out for us. Item number 4 is a set of 3 reclassifications, am I correct? Each very different. Manager Yakush, do you want to
Sure.
walk us through them?
Sure, so included in the packet was a brief description of each of the situations. That includes the approvals of the 2 reclassifications along with the cost analysis as provided by the city comptroller treasurer. And the final one was a reclassification request, but because of the unusual situation, those would not be permanent duties for that position because he's a plumbing inspector, and it's very unlikely that you would ever go to recruit and find a plumbing inspector with that additional electrical inspection certification. So the pay plan analyst Ann Antonson of Baker Tilly suggested doing a stipend. So that is a bit different, but nonetheless needs to come to the committee for approval. And I think if the committee is agreeable, we could do this with one motion because they were listed as one item on the agenda.
True enough, thank you, and making sure we understand. So the third of the 3, it's an unusual situation in terms of the combination of skills which is why it's not it's not being recommended as a reclassification, but instead for the incumbent to pay for those additional skills in this way outlined here.
Correct.
Okay. And the other two, I guess going in reverse order, I don't know. The second, the property appraiser, that's a kind of the most straight ahead approval of a reclassification, right? That they were, it seemed appropriate to them. And the first one, we have had as a non-decision item before, relates to the reorganization of central transportation after Susan Lemke's departure. And that's recommended with sort of the two, I'm going to call them deputies, the two sub-heads. So that's what we have before us. I noticed Director Konoski moving closer to the podium. Do you have information to add?
No, I'm just here to answer any questions about either the assessment tech reclassification or the certification of the inspectors and those additional certifications and the stipend that would come along with that.
Okay, thanks. So with all that as information, I would entertain a motion to put before us for the purposes of discussion.
No, you need a motion.
That's what I said. I was asking for one.
A motion to discuss is not appropriate.
We need a motion
Yes.
in order to discuss.
Okay. So make sure we're on the same page.
0-0. I would move to approve.
Alder Zarza moves to approve all three, I assume, yes? With Alder Dalton as a second?
Correct.
Very good. Starting now with any questions or discussion from committee members. And I'm checking with Alder Jennings, who apparently not. Very good. And before we vote, any discussion or questions from anyone else? Excellent. Let's do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? The motion carries. Bringing us to the reorganization of central transportation. Director Lemke is still here. If you would get us started. This is somewhat familiar, as I said before, but please.
Yeah, so we're on page 12 of the packet, and I apologize, it looks like our logo was censored there. I'm not sure quite what happened. Before I forget, this is yours.
Thank you.
X marks the spot, that's what he's talking about.
So we talked about this briefly last month to tell you the request along with the reclassification that you just voted on is coming forward, and especially with the approval of the reclassification, it makes sense, right, that the reorg is just logical. Over the last years, especially with the growth in transit, with the county programs and a lot of other things that they've taken on, even going back to pre-current facility when things were different. They didn't have their own mechanic staff, all that facility and everything else. So going back to, I'd say, beginning in about 2011 or so, we've been developing in a process where it really is a structure there where there are two parts of the operation, an operational one and an administrative one. The administrative side of transit's pretty heavy with all the state and federal funding, and operations with all those employees and assets and everything else is also very cumbersome. So this makes a lot of sense to me. I'm appreciative of the approval of the reclass. Next step that makes sense is just recognizing that through the reorganization. So if anybody's got questions.
Thank you for that. I mean, another aspect of this is that there's a kind of a talent retention piece too. I mean, are we talking about, in both cases, people who are in the organization?
Yes, absolutely. So Tom is just about as long with us as Susan was, who just retired. And Talon, who actually in some of the paperwork today was referenced in his previous role, even as AM supervisor, who's now, who will no longer be interim transit superintendent, will be appointed, or rather assigned that after tonight. Very much involved in a lot of the development in the last several years, so really strong team.
Thank you. So all of that to say, that, having people sustain their careers with the city as they gain experience and skills, generally a good thing. I would entertain a motion on the reorganization with both positions, or having acted just now on the one. Alder Dalton.
I'll move to approve the reorganization of Central Transit.
Thank you, Alder Dalton. Do I have a second? Alder Leek seconds. Any comments, discussion, questions? Now turning to everyone else not on the committee. Any questions, discussions, comments? Now turning to acting on it. All those in favor of approving the reorganization, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any noes or abstentions? Thank you very much. And our agenda is exhausted, and we are adjourned at 6:57. Thanks.
Videos of these meetings are available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.